The morning I came home from the hospital, my cousin had already decided I was finished. I did not know that yet. I found out the way you find out most things that matter, not all at once, but in pieces, each one a little worse than the last. My name is Earl Maddox. I'm 64 years old. I built a small construction company in Cleveland, Ohio over 31 years, starting with a used truck, a borrowed nail gun, and about $800 in a checking account. I am not a wealthy man by any measure, but I built something real, something that had my name on it. And when I walked back through my front door that February morning, still moving slower than I liked on my left side from the stroke, the first thing I did was open my laptop and pull up the company account. The balance was $4,312 3 weeks earlier before the ambulance came. It had been over $94,000. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at that number for a long time. The house was quiet. My daughter Nora had stayed with me the first 2 nights after I got home, but she had to get back to her own life. I had told her I was fine. I mostly believed it. The doctors said the stroke was minor, that I had caught it early, that with the right therapy I would get most of what I had lost back. I was doing the therapy, I was being careful, but $4,312. I already had a guess about what happened, and I did not like the guess. His name was Cliff Maddox, my cousin, 55 years old. His parents were killed in a car accident when he was 9, and my father took him in without a second thought or a single complaint. We shared a bedroom for 6 years. I taught him how to drive in an empty parking lot off Route 82. I was the best man at his wedding back in 1996. When I started the company, he was the first person I called because he was the person I trusted most in the world. I gave him signing authority on the business accounts and put his name on the operational paperwork because he had been in my house since he was a child, and it never occurred to me to question it. That trust turned out to be the most expensive thing I ever gave away. I did not call Cliff that first day. I sat with the number and thought it through carefully. There were legitimate explanations. Vendors get paid. Emergencies happen. I had been unconscious for the first 4 days after the stroke and then barely coherent for another week. It was possible something had come up. I told myself that while I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, which still had snow on the ground from a storm I had missed entirely while I was in the hospital. I did not believe the legitimate explanations, but I needed to be sure before I did anything. The next morning I called Roy Briggs. Roy had been my company accountant for 15 years before he retired the previous spring. He was 59 years old and had the kind of organized mind that made him genuinely uncomfortable with loose ends. He had not just kept my books. He had kept copies of everything independently because he told me once that in 30 years of accounting work, he had seen too many good businesses destroyed by missing records. I had always thought he was being overly cautious. Sitting there with my cold coffee and my $4,312 balance, I was grateful for every cautious instinct the man had ever had. I told Roy what I was looking at. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Give me 48 hours. While I waited, I went to the garage. There's a metal shelf in the back behind the lawn equipment and an old chest freezer that stopped working 3 years ago and I keep meaning to get rid of. On that shelf, I keep old company records in cardboard boxes going back to the beginning, contracts, bank authorization forms, vendor agreements, tax filings. I had not opened those boxes in years. I knew what was in them, and I knew the originals were there, which was all that mattered. I found what I was looking for in the third box. The original signature cards from when I set up the company accounts, my actual handwriting on file with the bank from 1993. I set those aside. At the bottom of the last box, under a stack of folders from 2009, I found an old photograph, Cliff and me at a family 4th of July cookout, maybe 1987. He was 18 or so, laughing at something off to the side of the frame. I was next to him holding a paper plate, looking the other direction. 2 people who grew up in the same house and thought that meant something permanent. I put the photograph in my shirt pocket. Roy called back on the morning of the second day. He had pulled the full transaction log going back 18 months, cross-referenced against his own independent records. What he found was not a surprise, but it was worse than I had prepared myself for. Cliff had been moving money out of the accounts for nearly 8 months before my stroke. Small amounts, never large enough to trigger an automatic alert. Steady and patient, the way you do something when you have thought it through and decided the risk is acceptable. The total over those 8 months came to just over $60,000. Then during my 3 weeks in the hospital, he had made 4 larger transfers that cleared out most of what remained. Roy read me the numbers in a flat, steady voice. When he finished, neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Then he said, "Earl, there is something else." He told me that Cliff had not just been taking money. Roy had found a name he did not recognize on 2 vendor payment authorizations from the previous October. A company called Garrett Property Services, receiving payments for what was logged as equipment rental. Roy had searched the business registry. Garrett Property Services was registered in the state of Ohio, but had no physical address, no website, and no history of any kind prior to September of last year. The registered agent was a man named Lyle Garrett. I knew that name. Lyle Garrett had worked for me as a site coordinator for about 4 years. He had left the company 2 years ago, and the circumstances had never been fully resolved. Roy had flagged some irregular expense approvals during Lyle's last few months, but Lyle had resigned before anything came to a formal head, and I had let it go because I had other things going on, and because I was at the time still operating under the assumption that the people around me were mostly honest. Roy had seen Lyle and Cliff having lunch together twice in the past month. He had not thought much of it at the time. He was thinking about it now. I thanked Roy and told him to hold everything he had. Then I sat in the kitchen and thought about what I was actually dealing with, not just the money, not just the transfers, the shell company, the old employee, the months of planning. This was not a man who had panicked when I got sick and made a bad decision. This was something that had been in motion for a long time, and my stroke had simply been the opportunity to finish it. That changed something in me, not dramatically. I did not get loud about it, but it settled something cold and clear into the center of my chest, and I carried it there for the rest of the process. 3 days after Roy's call, a man named Perry Aldrich knocked on my front door. He was about 50, a lawyer from Phoenix, with the careful manner of someone who delivers complicated news for a living. He had been trying to reach me for several weeks. The contact information he had was outdated, and when he called the company number, whoever answered had told him I was unavailable indefinitely. Perry sat down at my kitchen table and told me that my uncle Hank Maddox had passed away 6 weeks earlier. I had known Hank was getting on in years. We had not been close for a long time. Geography and the slow drift of separate lives had put distance between us. But I remembered him clearly, a quiet man, a rancher outside Phoenix who kept to himself and did not ask much from anyone. Hank had left me $2 and $1 million. I asked Perry to say that again. He did. He also told me that the estate proceedings had run into a complication. 2 weeks before Perry found me, someone had contacted his office claiming to be my legal representative, authorized to act on my behalf during my recovery. That person had submitted a power of attorney form, signed and notarized, and had filed paperwork attempting to redirect the estate process. I asked Perry the name on that paperwork, Cliff Maddox. The power of attorney was dated 4 days after my stroke. I had been unconscious 4 days after my stroke. There was not a version of events in which I had signed anything. Perry told me he had already suspected something was wrong, which was why he had driven from Phoenix to Cleveland to find me in person rather than continuing to communicate through the company line. He was a thorough man. I appreciated that about him immediately. I told him I had never signed any power of attorney. I had never authorized anyone to represent me in any estate matter. I asked him to hold everything in place and to stop all communication with Cliff Maddox until he heard from me directly. After Perry left, I called Roy back. Then I called a probate litigation attorney named Carl Denton, who had been recommended to me years ago by a business contact and whose card I had kept in my desk drawer without ever expecting to need it. Carl was direct and unimpressed by complications. I liked him immediately for the same reason I had liked Perry. He listened to everything I had, asked 3 or 4 very specific questions, and then said, "We are in a strong position, but we need to move carefully and document everything in sequence." He also told me what I had already begun to understand. What Cliff had done by submitting a fraudulent power of attorney to Perry's office was not a civil matter. It was criminal, forgery of a notarized instrument, fraud in connection with an estate proceeding. If the evidence held, the district attorney's office would not need me to file a complaint. The court would refer the matter on its own. I told Carl I wanted everything done correctly and in order, no shortcuts, no informal pressure. I wanted the record to be clean and complete because I knew that Cliff would eventually look for any irregularity he could use to muddy the picture. There was one more thing I needed before the hearing. I took the original signature cards from the company files to a document examiner, a retired forensic specialist Roy knew through a former client. I brought her the power of attorney form Perry had received, and I sat across from her in a small office off Euclid Avenue while she examined both documents for about 25 minutes. She looked up and said the signatures were not consistent. The pen pressure was different. The letter formation on my first name was wrong across every sample she compared. She could put that assessment in writing, and she would stand behind it in any proceeding. She put it in writing that same afternoon. I drove home, made dinner, and did not call Cliff. What I did next was nothing. That was deliberate. I went to my physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. I answered emails slowly, with the kind of short, slightly confused responses that a man still recovering from a stroke might send. I let the company voicemail fill up and returned calls a day late. I moved through my days as if I were still the man in the hospital bed. Not quite back, not quite reliable, too worn down to be watching anything closely. Cliff came by the house about 2 weeks after I got home. He brought a bag of groceries, bread, soup cans, a carton of orange juice. He set it on the counter and told me not to worry about it. He looked around the kitchen the way a man looks around a room he is already thinking of in past tense. He sat down across from me and said he had been handling things at the company and that I should not stress myself over the details. He said the most important thing was for me to focus on getting better. He asked how the therapy was going. He said the doctor had told him when he called to check in that I was making progress but that it would take time. He had called my doctor. I filed that away. We talked for about 40 minutes. He mentioned twice that the company had been having a slow quarter and that some expenses had come up that needed to be covered. He did not look me directly in the eye when he said this. He looked at the table, or at the window, or at the bag of groceries he had brought, as if the groceries were evidence of something he needed me to notice. When he left, I wrote down everything he had said with the time and the date at the top of the page. I kept that log for the next 3 weeks. Cliff called twice more during that period. Both calls followed the same pattern. He led with concern about my health, moved to vague updates about company operations, and ended with some comment about finances that was designed to feel like information but was actually a test. He was checking to see how much I understood. Each time I gave him the same tired, slightly foggy version of myself. I thanked him for keeping things running. I said I was sure everything was fine. I said I trusted him. That last part cost me something to say, but I said it. Roy and I met in person twice during those weeks at a diner on the west side of Cleveland where neither of us was likely to run into anyone connected to the company. Roy had organized everything into a clear sequence. The 8 months of small transfers, the 4 larger transfers during my hospitalization, the Garrett Property Services payments, and a timeline that laid out exactly when each action had occurred relative to my stroke. He had cross-referenced his independent records with the bank statements Perry's office had obtained through the estate process. Everything matched. Roy had also done something I had not asked him to do. He had quietly reached out to a former colleague at the bank, someone he had known for years, and confirmed that Cliff had presented verbal authorization for the hospital period transfers in person at the branch, with a printed letter on company letterhead that bore my signature. Another signature I had not written. I added that to the document file Carl Denton was building. It was during the second meeting with Roy that something shifted between us that I had not expected. We had finished going through the paperwork, and Roy was putting folders back into his bag, and he stopped and looked at me for a moment in the way that people look at you when they are deciding whether to say the thing they are actually thinking. He said, I should have caught this sooner. I told him he had been retired, that it was not his responsibility. He said he knew that. He said it anyway. I understood what he meant. He had spent 15 years keeping those books, and somewhere in the back of his mind he had probably noticed things he told himself were not his business anymore. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with. I did not try to talk him out of it. I just said, you caught it when it mattered, Roy. That is what counts. He nodded and zipped up his bag, and we did not talk about it again. The escalation came the week before the hearing. Cliff called Nora. She told me about it that evening. He had called her on her cell phone, which she had not given him, which meant he had gotten it from somewhere else. He had told her, in a tone she described as concerned and careful, that he was worried about my state of mind, that the stroke had affected me more than I was letting on, that he had spoken to people who knew me, and they shared his concern. He told her that some of the decisions I appeared to be making around the company and the estate were not the kind of decisions a man in full health would make. He suggested she might want to speak to my doctors directly and consider whether I needed more support in managing my affairs. Nora was 38 years old and a high school teacher and not easily rattled. She told me what he had said in a steady voice, and then she asked me what was actually going on. I told her all of it. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Just keep that call documented. Write down what he said, word for word, with the date and time. Do not call him back. Do not let on that you told me." She did exactly that and sent me the written account by email within the hour. I forwarded it to Carl Denton that same night. Carl's response came the following morning. He said the contact with Nora, combined with the earlier approach through my physician, established a pattern of attempting to influence third parties regarding my mental capacity. He said that pattern would be relevant at the hearing. He said we were ready. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in Phoenix. I booked my flight that afternoon. I had never been to Phoenix before. The flight was 2.5 hours, and I spent most of it looking out the window at nothing in particular. I was not nervous, exactly. I was focused in the way you get focused when you have done everything you can do in advance, and the only thing left is to show up and let it play out. Perry had arranged a hotel near the probate attorney's office downtown. Clean room, firm bed, good light in the morning. I slept better than I had expected. The hearing was held in a low building off Central Avenue, with a parking lot full of white sedans and a waiting room with chairs that were bolted to the floor. Perry was already there when I arrived. Carl had flown in from Cleveland the night before. We went through the final documents in a conference room for about 45 minutes before the hearing started. Everything was in order. The transaction logs, the signature analysis, the timeline Roy had built, the written account from Nora, the letter Perry had received from Cliff's representative. All of it in sequence, clean and complete. Cliff arrived 10 minutes after I did. He walked in with his own attorney, a man I did not recognize, and a leather portfolio under his arm. He stopped for just a moment when he came through the door and saw me sitting at the table. It was less than a second. Then he composed himself and sat down across from me. He looked like a man who had spent weeks preparing for a version of this day that did not include me being functional and present. That gap between what he had expected and what he was looking at showed in the way he set his portfolio down a little too carefully and did not look at me again after the first glance. The hearing officer was a woman in her 50s who had the practiced patience of someone who had sat through a great many disputes and found none of them surprising. She went through the procedural steps without ceremony. Cliff's attorney presented the power of attorney first. He described it as a straightforward authorization executed by a man who had been incapacitated and had wisely arranged for a trusted family member to act on his behalf. Perry's office had already flagged the document for examination. When the forensic report was entered into the record, the hearing officer read it without expression. The report was 3 pages of technical language that came down to a single conclusion. The signature was not consistent with authenticated samples of Earl Maddox's handwriting across 14 reference documents. The pen pressure was different. The letter formation was wrong. The assessment was unambiguous. Cliff's attorney asked for a short recess. The request was noted and denied. Carl then walked through the transaction record. He presented Roy's independent accounting alongside the bank statements, showing the 8 months of incremental transfers and the 4 larger transfers during my hospitalization. He presented the Garrett Property Services registration, the vendor payments, and the absence of any legitimate business activity associated with that entity. He presented the bank employee's account of Cliff, appearing in person with an authorization letter bearing my signature during the period I was in the hospital. He presented Nora's written account of the phone call. He presented documentation that Cliff had contacted my physician to obtain information about my condition without my authorization. He laid it all out in sequence, item by item, without drama. Cliff's attorney objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Then Cliff made the mistake that I think had been building in him for the entire hearing. His attorney was mid-sentence when Cliff leaned forward and said that the documents were legitimate, that I had been confused since the stroke, that anyone who had spent time with me could see I was not capable of managing a business or an estate of that size. He said this directly to the hearing officer, not in response to any question. The hearing officer looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has just watched a man hand over the last piece of evidence needed against himself. She told him to wait for a question before speaking. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Cliff sat back. He was breathing harder than the situation required. The hearing officer did not deliberate at length. The documentation was clear. The forensic analysis was uncontested by any credible counter-evidence. The pattern of conduct, including the third-party contacts and the forged authorization, was in the record. She ruled in my favor. The estate of Hank Maddox passed to me as the named beneficiary per the terms of the will. In the hallway outside, Cliff said my name. I turned around. He looked like a man who had been running a long time on the assumption that he was faster than everyone else and had just found out he was not. He started to say something about not meaning for things to go this far. I let him get one sentence out. Then I told him quietly that he should call a lawyer. I turned around and walked out to where Perry was waiting. The criminal referral came from the probate court itself, which is exactly what Carl had said would happen. Cliff was charged with forgery of a notarized instrument and fraud in connection with an estate proceeding. His legal costs over the following months consumed most of what he had. June Colby was gone before the charges were formally filed. Lyle Garrett cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, which was his decision to make and not mine to have any feeling about. I flew home on a Friday evening. Roy picked me up from the airport, which I had not asked him to do. He was just there when I came through the doors, standing next to his car in the short-term lot with his hands in his coat pockets. We did not talk much on the drive back. He asked if I was hungry. I said I could eat. We stopped at a place off I-90 and had eggs and coffee and sat in a booth for about an hour talking about nothing that had anything to do with the last 3 months. It was exactly what I needed. There is a letter from Hank in the tin box on my desk now, next to the photograph of him and me from a family gathering in 1989. 4 pages, handwritten. He apologized for the distance. He explained that he had never been good at staying in touch and that he knew it. At the end, he wrote, "I always knew you were the one who would not come looking for what I had. That mattered more to me than you probably know. I hope you do something good with it. I trust you to know what good means." I put the letter down and sat with that for a while. The company is still running. Roy comes in 2 days a week to keep the books straight. I'm more careful about paperwork than I used to be, about whose name is on what and what I have signed and what I have not. That is a habit I should have had 30 years ago. I have it now. The old photograph of Cliff and me is still in my desk drawer. I have not thrown it away. I'm not sure I can fully explain that. Maybe it is just a true record of something that was real before it became something else. And a man my age has earned the right to keep complicated things without having to resolve them into something simpler. I am 64 years old. I built something from nothing and nearly lost it while I was flat on my back in a hospital. I got it back the only way that holds, by doing it right, by keeping the record clean, by letting the documents speak instead of my anger. That is enough. If you're a man who has spent decades building something, whether it is a business, a home, a retirement, or just a life that stands on its own, you already understand what it costs. You know what it feels like to have trusted the wrong person with something that took years to build. Maybe it has happened to you. Maybe you have watched it happen to someone you know. What I want you to take from this is simple. Document everything. Know whose name is on your paperwork. Do not let trust be a reason to skip the step that protects you. The law works when you give it something to work with. And when someone tries to tell you that you are finished, that you are too old, too slow, too worn down to hold on to what is yours, remember that the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet, stay focused, and let the record speak. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below. I would genuinely like to know where you are listening from and what it brought up for you. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, pass it along.